Augmented sixth chords. This course has mainly been centered around diatonicism and how to understand music structure as it pertains to a particular key or tonal center. In the secondary dominance video, I introduced some chromatic chords, those using notes that only exist outside the diatonic key. If you're not sure about the difference between these two, you might want to go back and watch that video first. In this video, I'll introduce another chromatic chord that's not as common, but appears in classical music, jazz, and sometimes in today's popular music. The augmented sixth chord falls in the category of predominant chords, chords that prepare for the dominant. The common diatonic predominant chords, that is, chords within the key, are 2, 4, and 1, 6, 4. That's 1 in second inversion. The purpose of these chords are to prolong and enhance the eventual cadence to the tonic. Since we can count on the 5 to 1 being a strong resolution, thinking creatively about what comes before the dominant is a great way to make a cadence more interesting, tense, and even allow you to tease the listener by drawing out that resolution. Also, since the 5 to 1 is so structurally strong, we can easily reach outside of the key for some chromatic, predominant possibilities. The most common of these would be the secondary dominant, also known as the 5 of 5, where we use the dominant chord in the key of the dominant. Similar to the 5 of 5, another common chromatic predominant is the 7 diminished 7 of 5, which is most often used in first inversion. There's also the augmented sixth chord, which we'll talk about in this video. As well as the Neapolitan sixth chord. This video looks at the augmented sixth, but to understand where it comes from, let's take a closer look at that secondary diminished seventh chord. Diminished seventh chords are extremely versatile and effective when used well. The dissonant harmonies make for strong resolutions, especially because the voices tend to resolve by half step, as in this example. Any secondary diminished seventh comes from the minor key of whatever chord it's resolving to, even if the chord isn't minor. In this case, F sharp diminished 7 is the chord built on the leading tone of G ascending melodic minor, which means we resolve the leading tone up, while the others resolve down by step. An augmented sixth chord works the exact same way, but with even more tension by changing it so all four voices resolve by just a half step. By changing just one note in the 7 diminished 7 of 5, in this case A lowered to A flat, we form the interval of an augmented sixth between A flat and F sharp. While seventh intervals, such as in a dominant seventh chord, tend to resolve downward, its enharmonic equivalent, the augmented sixth, tends to resolve upward. This is the heart of what makes an augmented sixth chord work, that this interval resolves outwardly to the root of the dominant. While the other voices, again, resolve down by half step. The root of the augmented sixth is always a minor second above the dominant. I'll say that again because it's really important. The root of the augmented sixth chord is always a minor second above the dominant. When we look at this chord on the piano, we can see and hear that it's enharmonically equivalent to a dominant 7th chord, in this case, A flat 7. The important thing to remember is that we don't spell it like a dominant 7th because it's not functioning as a dominant 7th. Since what makes this chord so effective is the contrary movement between the root and the augmented 6th, we want to spell the notes in a way that makes this relationship as clear as possible. This is why you sometimes see odd accidentals, like double sharps and double flats in sheet music. They highlight the harmonic function a note is playing in a particular context. But remember, chord symbols generally don't highlight function. They simply tell you what notes to play at a given moment to achieve the desired harmony. So A flat 7 is the most transparent chord symbol for this augmented 6th chord. Conventionally, there are 3 slightly varying types of augmented 6th chords, each named for an important country in the history of Western classical music. The one we've looked at so far is known as the German augmented 6th chord. If you wanted to achieve the same effect, but with a lighter, more consonant harmony, then you could choose to omit the 5th of the chord and instead double the 3rd, making it an Italian augmented 6th. Since we omitted the 5th, we would label this an A flat 7, no 5. When working with the Italian augmented 6th, remember to resolve the doubled thirds in opposite directions to avoid issues with parallel octaves. Finally, if you'd prefer an even richer, more dissonant version, you could lower the 5th of the chord by half step, forming an augmented 4th interval with the root. This chord works because the lowered 5th is actually a common tone with the dominant it's resolving to. This last type is known as a French augmented 6th. And we would label this an A flat 7, flat 5, which is actually a common altered jazz chord. So here we have the German, Italian, and French augmented 6th chords. So, no matter what type, when moving to the dominant, we want each note in the augmented 6th to resolve by step to the closest chord tone. Same with the Italian, making sure our 2 C's resolve by step in the opposite direction. Notice that with the French augmented 6th, that the lowered 5th, the D, is a common tone with the dominant, a kind of anticipation. Also notice that in all 3 types, the augmented 6th interval resolves identically to an octave. Also, because this is a predominant chord, remember the root is always a minor 2nd above the dominant, although it's not necessarily always in root position. Because augmented 6th tend to be used at important cadences, both the German and Italian versions often resolve to 1/6/4, which is a common way to prolong the dominant. Here's an example from one of my favorite pieces, Mozart's Magic Flute Overture, where we find an Italian augmented 6th in the key of E flat. As a minor second above the dominant, spelled correctly, this chord is a C flat 7, no 5. Notice the contrary motion from the minor sixth to the augmented sixth, then to the octave. Also, see how the doubled third resolves by step in contrary motion. Finally, here's an example in C sharp minor. Take a minute and see if you can identify where and what type of augmented sixth appears in the opening to this nocturne. And here's the analysis, where we see in the last two chords a German augmented sixth resolving to a 5, which in C sharp minor is A7 resolving to G sharp major. Notice the outward movement of the augmented sixth interval between the A and the F double sharp, which is, again, spelled correctly as an augmented sixth interval, while the other two voices resolve downward by step. Anyway, thanks for watching, and feel free to ask any questions or leave any other favorite examples of augmented sixth chords in the comments. Also be sure to check out my next video where I show some augmented sixth chords in popular music.